Thank you for joining us for this episode of Talking Health in the 406, where we're one community under the big sky. I'm Trina Filan, a public health evaluator for diabetes and cardiovascular health.
And I'm Margaret Mullins, the Social Determinants of Health Program Manager.
Today, we're talking with Jennifer Anderson, an associate specialist with Montana State University Extension Community Vitality Program. Welcome, Jennifer.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Tell us about yourself and your role at Cooperative Extension, please, Jennifer.
My background is an associate specialist in community vitality with Montana State University Extension. I have been with Extension approximately 29 years. My specialty now is community vitality. So I do community development work across the state with primarily rural communities. Prior to that, I worked for a significant amount of time as a local county extension agent serving Rosebud and Treasure counties in southeast Montana. I'm a fifth generation Montanan and very passionate about our rural communities across the state.
Extension does a ton of different things, right? And folks may think of Extension as agriculture and supporting agricultural communities. What other things, just so that people get a broad idea, does Extension do? Why community development?
Sure, that's a great point. Cooperative Extension is part of the foundational piece of the land-grant university mission, which is across the United States. So every state has a land-grant university. In Montana, ours happens to be Montana State University. So part of the mission of a land-grant university is to provide outreach and education to the people of the state. And that is done through the Extension Service. So Extension has four primary, what we would call programmatic areas. So most generally people that are familiar with Extension are familiar with the agriculture and the natural resource development sides of things. And then next is probably 4-H or youth development. And then the third piece is family and consumer science, affectionately, historically known as home economics. And then the fourth programmatic area that people are less familiar with is community development. So it is a foundational piece of the extension model. However, much less known as the other programmatic areas. So on the ground level, in the communities, we have county extension agents. And these folks are tasked with doing many different jobs and taking on many different roles in a community. And they really work hard to adapt and meet the local needs of the community. So they're very much boots on the ground. Next level up is a specialist or associate specialist. And these positions have a primary focus in specific areas. Mine happens to be community development. So we have a lot of specialists and associate specialists that have a primary focus in a specific area. And we provide support and outreach and education in those specific areas. So sometimes that means we're helping and assisting our local agents. And other times it means we're working directly with constituents and clientele.
Thank you.
Yes, that was a great explanation. What an extensive program and organization.
Extension is such a well-kept secret. It's been around over 100 years, and still to this day, there's a lot of people who really do not understand what it is and what it does. Now, specifically community development, or the Community Vitality Program, we switched the name to it, went from community development to community vitality, really works to engage Montanans to strengthen the social, civic, economic, and leadership abilities of their communities. So we kind of approach this work with the values of collaboration, curiosity, and responsiveness. So we try to ensure that our efforts are community-centered and community-driven. The best work comes from within a community. So we are here to lift up, support, help, assist any way that we can.
So for today's podcast, and I'll give our listeners a little bit of background too, we're focusing in on a program called Reimagining Rural, which offers very small rural and frontier towns an opportunity to build civic health through small, doable projects that work with the resources available in each community. From past work we've done in our chronic disease prevention programs, we know that people feel connected to their communities, and feeling like they have the power to make change and have their voices heard is really important to their individual health and to the overall health of the places that they live. And we also know that where people live, even their actual zip code can influence how healthy people are compared to their neighbors in another zip code. Sometimes folks in chronic disease prevention forget this connection between the health of the place and the health of the person. But civic health is public health, and promoting civic health can have a big impact on chronic disease prevention and management. So, Jennifer, would you define civic health as you see it in your work?
So that's a great question, and it's a great background and introduction because there's so much truth to what you just said. Civic health encompasses so much. So it's the social well-being, it's the infrastructure well-being, it's everything that goes into making up a community. We look at this through the lens of something called the community capital framework. That is a community development theory. And basically it falls back on every community has assets and has strengths. And, in our work, we frame it through the seven capitals. So these are things such as, your social capital, like the connections, those, connections that you have within a community and beyond with state, regional, with resources as well. So that social connection, right? Cultural capital. So what are the traditions and the things that mean a lot to us and we make up who we are, all the way to like political capital, built capital, natural capital, financial capital. So we look at our communities through the lens of those community capitals. From there, we try to help communities identify what those assets are in each of their communities and how we can try to build those up.
That's a super helpful explanation, actually. That's interesting to have 7 different capitals and being able to break it down like that. Can you give us like some examples of activities that are related to and promote civic health through your program?
Okay, so talking specifically about Reimagining Rural. So Reimagining Rural was a brainchild of some of our folks in Extension who worked in community development. We had this idea, but really what happened is we were all together and we started talking about how there really wasn't a focus on rural community development. Nobody was really meeting that need that we could see. And because we are embedded in almost every county and reservation across the state, we have a pretty good understanding of what's going on in our small towns. So we came up with an idea of like, let's do something. Let's try something that's going to really impact our small towns. So the idea of Reimagining Rural came from, it's really rooted in trying to help our communities build local capacity by expanding partnerships. So and that's that social connection again, right? So it might be within the community, because sometimes we know, even in small towns, groups are siloed. So they kind of have tunnel vision and they work on their own little project and they don't see how it connects to other projects. So expanding partnerships. This also means creating partnerships between local groups and state or regional resources. Increasing awareness and knowledge of those resources that are available. So many times, and you guys probably see this too on the health end, is that our small towns don't even know what's available to them. So, you don't know what you don't know. So we really strive to expand that awareness about what's available to our small towns. And then the big one is inspiring folks to dream big. Like our small towns, I think because of what we've seen, the changes and things that we've seen over the last 20, 30 years is this idea that rural is dying. And, it's so hard to build positive successes and positive momentum when you're in a deficit-based approach. When all you ever see is negativity or the bad stuff, I'll say that's not great words to use. But when you look around your town and you see you got potholes in your streets and your grocery store closed up and your school's on the verge of consolidating, it's really hard to look through the lens of what's good about your town. And so what we tried to do with Reimagining Rural and talking about civic health is get folks to look at their community through a different lens. Extension completed a study called the Montana Mover Study. My colleague, Tara Mastel, and some other folks at MSU. And we know people are moving into rural. And we know the reasons why people are moving into rural. And the majority of those are because of quality of life. They want the small town experience. They want to know their neighbors. They want to feel safe. They want peaceful tranquility and that kind of, hallmark sense. And they love small towns. That's why they're moving into these places. And so we try to get communities to see those things, what's good about their town.
Okay, so I have so many thoughts about this because when Margaret was speaking a little bit earlier, she referenced some work that we did a couple of years ago about connection, health, the things that create connection, how people perceive their resources, what kinds of resources they perceive as useful or challenging. And one of the things that seems true based on some of the work we've each done and the work that you've done is that it's hard to, one, see that you have assets, just like you said, deficit mindset, right? And we've sort of conditioned ourselves to see the challenges versus the opportunities, right?
Absolutely.
But then on top of it, people who are new into smaller areas may have a ton of ideas and assets, right? But it's really hard for them. Not always, but in a lot of cases, it's hard for them to become part of the trusted community fabric so that they can feel comfortable sharing those ideas. And then, there's a melding, right? But that's not always like the melding of newcomers and people who've been there a long time is sometimes a hard barrier to cross. Is that?
Yeah, that's an absolute. That was some feedback we got from a survey that we did where people said it takes a while to be accepted. If you're coming into a new community full of great ideas, Trina just summed it up great, really. But, just suddenly, inundating people with thoughts can feel overwhelming. And people are like, well, you don't understand our community. So, yes.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So Reimagining Rural too, I guess I should back up a little bit. It's kind of has grown. It started with a few events, and then we moved into hosting an annual. We call it the virtual community gathering, which started in 2019, 2020. So we actually started virtual before COVID required us all to go virtual. And so the idea behind this virtual series is the best way that I can describe it is old school satellite like watch party. So what that is it's very simple. It's 3 nights of what we would call education and programming. When the community applies, they gather their people and they meet in a community setting. It could be a church, it could be a school, it could be a library, it might even be the local watering hole. So they gather their people and they tune in. And they're tuning in live with 16, 17, 18 other communities across the state. And so it's a 2-hour session. Part of that session is we hear from a rural expert and we hear from a rural success story. And then the other part of the night, we just turn off the TV and we give them some facilitated, guided questions. And we say, now have a local conversation about what you just heard. We do 3 nights of that. So that's the virtual series. Getting back to your original question. One of the first series that we did, we had Ben Winchester. He joined us via Zoom. He is with the University of Minnesota Extension, and he is a rural expert. And he had done some previous studies about newcomers and changing the narrative from rural is not dying, it is changing. And that was a eureka moment for a lot of communities and a lot of people. And we have subsequently had him back and a few times. And that is what led to the Montana Movers study. And really interestingly, a few communities took this idea and ran with it and started hosting newcomers events in their small towns. Because what they thought they were, and maybe what they really were, how they treated newcomers were 2 different things. Exactly to the point you said. And there's a lot of reasons why communities are not very trusting of newcomers and not very accepting of new ways, right? There's lots of reasons for that. And they're not all bad. But what we did learn from Reimagining Rural is that there are people moving in. People want to be included in the community. And the more inclusive a community is, the better off they're going to be. And so how welcoming are you as a community? I will use my own hometown, Forsyth, as an example. So Forsyth went through the Reimagining Rural series and decided to host a newcomers event. Did a lot of due diligence of trying to figure out who are the newcomers, how do we even find them. Held a newcomers event, and there was over 100 people in the room. And this is a small town in southeastern Montana that has been experiencing a lot of change, right? So 100 people in the room, fascinating. All these newcomers come out, and we asked them questions like, why'd you move here? And the overwhelming positive sense that these people gave was just phenomenal. And that now has led to moving on 5 years later. Newcomer comes in, works remotely, and his family is now, really becoming part of the community. And this gentleman has stepped up and sat on a few different communities. And he came in with the idea to have a Frisbee golf. He loves Frisbee golf. Comes in with this idea of setting up a Frisbee golf course, and he's got the plans. Like he has, you could tell he spent a lot of time thinking about this. And the Reimagining Rural group embraced it. And here we are a year later, and the Frisbee golf course is up and running in a park. And there are people that come to Forsyth specifically to utilize the Frisbee golf course, which would never have happened had we not changed our mindset and been more receptive to newcomers, welcoming to newcomers, and invited this person to the table, right? Invited this person to the table with his ideas. So anyway, and we have other communities that have done similar events and welcoming newcomers.
That's great.
But yeah, absolutely. That's a challenge in our small towns. Absolutely.
It seems like an amazing opportunity for, rural places to begin to sort of wrestle with some of those civic health issues that we just talked about earlier. One of the things I'm wondering is how, this group is one of the ways, but how do you move people from that deficit mindset to the asset mindset? Like, what sort of activities? You have those events. Are there other things that can help with that?
The way we kind of approach it is the first thing you've got to do is create awareness, right? People, you don't know what you don't know. So for us, it's awareness of the awareness of there's a different way to approach your community. So awareness and knowledge, right? Like, we start with, showing communities through the Reimagining Rural that there's a different way to approach your community. There's a different way to look at it. Also, the piece that helps too is the success stories. I mean, we hear so much great feedback about the success stories because there is this sense of competitiveness, right? But there's also a greater sense of collaboration with our small towns across the state. So number one, you're participating in Reimagining Rural, and let's just say you've got a small town, Shoto, great example. Shoto was one of our spotlight communities first series. Shoto had done this fantastic job of rebranding their community. And what's a local brand? Like, that was something communities didn't understand. But that first year, we showcased Shoto, and they told us all about their branding. And then in the next few years, about 5 other towns were like, well, if Shoto can do it, we can do it too. So Cut Bank is another great example. They went through Reimagining Rural, created a community survey, fantastic community survey, had tremendous response. And the end result was the community branding. Like, they developed a new community brand for their town. They've become part of the Montana Main Street program, and they are working diligently on wayfinding signage. And with that, what we've seen from the communities working, that social cohesiveness again, is communities are helping communities. They're sharing resources. That didn't happen before. There wasn't that connection before. So now what you see is, like, for example, Shoto's like, oh yeah, we did it, and here's how we did it, and here's our stuff. Use it. Great example for wayfinding is Glasgow. Glasgow has tremendous wayfinding. And so if people who don't know what wayfinding is, it's the cool signage in your downtown areas and beyond. When you go into these towns, you'll see it. And they're directional signage that shows you where things are at. Where's the school? Where's the library? Where's the courthouse? Where's City Hall? And they look good. Like, they're aesthetically pleasing, right? So, anyway, Glasgow, tremendous plans. So we have spotlighted Glasgow a few times. Glasgow, is more than willing to share their recipe for success, like how they got it done. So again, it's just a great example of that social, what we would refer to as social capital. What we've seen, since the 5-6 years that we've done this, is tremendous growth in social capital across these communities that are participating.
Jennifer, how many communities across the state have participated?
We are at approximately 50 communities across the state that have participated in Reimagining Rural at some point or another. There's about 16 of them that are repeat.
Oh, okay.
Communities. I think 50 plus communities, 16 repeat, and we're estimating over 500 direct contacts through this. We have multiple partnering organizations that have come on board to work with us. Our major partner throughout this entire program since its inception has been the Montana Community Foundation, because we have very similar goals and missions when it comes to our small towns. And they have local community foundation affiliates across Montana. So there's a lot of crossover between reimagining rural communities and communities that have local community foundations. And in fact, that's been an outcome too, is we've seen, Cut Bank is another great example. So Cut Bank did not have a local community foundation. And from participating in Reimagining Rural, I can't say that is the sole reason why they have a community foundation, but certainly learned about the benefits to having a community foundation. And they're doing a tremendous job. They just started a local affiliate and have put out a couple fundraising goals and are meeting that. So And the reason why I mention that too is it is so, so important that communities understand that no one's coming to save them. So there is a huge transfer of wealth happening right now from one generation to the next. And if communities want to be sustainable and thriving into the next 20, 30 years, they've got to have some local financial capital. And so what's one way that you can do that is create a local community foundation.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Because then people who live in the area, who value the area, can make endowments or smaller donations to that foundation. And then the foundation invests that back into the community, right?
Yeah, reinvest that back into the community. A great example. And what happens too, and we see this, we know this from experience, is you have people who have left the community. Like, right? That's going to happen. You're going to have some attrition. You're going to have people who grow up in a small town and they leave. And they're probably not coming back, but they still love their hometown. A great example is Broadus in Powder River County. They received a very large sum of money donation from folks, a person who just loves that community, and it has went into their endowment, and they then get to in turn reinvest funds back into their community.
I can imagine that. I think that place where you've grown up, right? Those feelings run deep even when you leave. It's your hometown.
Right. Absolutely. And especially if you're being intentional to create a place that is inclusive, that has civic pride, that promotes a healthy lifestyle, right? And when I say healthy lifestyle, I mean holistically healthy. There's not just physical health, but mental health, social health, all of those things. People who have that experience in a small town really are rich.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if there's 50 of the, 50 locations that have participated, I'm curious, does any other state have this program?
Sort of, but no, like Reimagining Rural is a Montana thing. And we have been contacted by other states who want to kind of replicate it and do it their way. So I'd say there are similar offerings, but Reimagining Rural is a Montana program.
Amazing. Great.
Yeah, that's a really cool, inventive way to engage folks. And it's very, I love the idea that 16 or 18 or 20 towns want to get on a 2-hour Zoom call and learn something and then talk about how they're going to use that, right?
Yeah.
That's fabulous. And you had mentioned that you have Reimagining Rural groups. So it sounds like one of the things that could happen is that people decide this is one of the things we're going to do. And we're going to both participate in these sessions and then also do stuff.
Yeah. So at the end of so there's other components now. It started as a statewide gathering. Then we moved into the virtual series. Then we incorporated something we call inspiration hours. So what we found through the virtual series is that people wanted more. They wanted more content. And so we created inspiration hours that were just one-offs. They were kind of deep dives into topics. They ranged from rural childcare to wayfinding signage to how renovating buildings in your downtown, like just specific topics. And we were I want to say we're pretty diligent about asking folks, what do you want to listen to? And we'll work on making it happen. Okay. So we went to inspiration hours. So now at the end of that virtual series, at the end of the 3-part series, Montana Community Foundation has offered what we would call or refer to as like seed grants. We've been able to do this because of Montana Community Foundation. they've offered seed grants of $1,000 to up to upwards of $2,000 to communities that come up with an easy, what we refer to as low-hanging fruit project that came out of their Reimagining Rural conversations. So then they have the opportunity to apply for some funding right then and there to complete a project. So we do our best to take that positive momentum and turn it into a win in their town. And a great example, going back to that, ties back to that newcomers, the Frisbee golf course in Forsyth was a Reimagining Rural project. Like that is what they apply. It came up in the discussions. That is what they applied for, and that's how they use the funding. So now this year, thanks to the great work of our partner, Montana Community Foundation, they received a $250,000 grant from the Wells Fargo Foundation. And so now the applications for the 2026 series is open right now, so communities can apply. The virtual series will be February 4th, 11th, and 18th. And at the conclusion of that, there will be community grants available for advanced projects upwards of $7,500.
Wow.
Yes, that's amazing.
Yeah. So a community that goes through the 2026 virtual community gatherings and they jump through all the hoops, they still have to apply, but they could be eligible for a community grant of $7,500 or more to work on community projects.
Jennifer, have you heard of the GO grants from Headwaters Foundation?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, so Headwaters Foundation in Missoula they have a whole bunch of stuff they do, but one of the easy within reach things that they have, it's called GO grants. And they, I think last year were $8,000. And Headwaters focuses on kids and families, right? So that's their mission. So if you have any communities that are working on projects that are oriented toward kids and family health, tell them about this, because the GO grants are really low barrier. It's an easy application. They try to get the money out in like 3 days after they get the application. And the only hoops they have to jump through are like a final report at the end saying, this is what we did. So let people know about that if they seem like they have a project that's relevant, because Headwaters wants people to do that stuff.
I will. One of the things that we're attempting to work on, at MSU Extension, the Community Vitality Program, there's 2.5 of us. So there's myself and my colleague, Tara Mastel, are full-time. And then we have a half-time associate specialist, Katie Weaver, whose primary focus is on leadership development, which is a whole nother aspect of this, because we have another program called Big Sky, Big Leadership that really focuses on developing human capital, but your people's individual leadership skills, because we also know in our rural towns that's needed. In addition to that, with part of the $250,000 grant, what we're trying to create is more resources for our small towns where they can go, almost like a one-stop shop, where they can go to one place and find all kinds of resources available to rural towns. And part of that is because what we also know and have learned through Reimagining Rural is the majority of these towns run on volunteers. There's not paid staff folks whose primary responsibility is to do community development. So what does that mean? So that means you have your chambers are ran by volunteers, your organizations are ran by volunteers. They don't have city planners. They don't have county planners per se. So we have to do our job to make it as easy as possible for these folks. because that's a huge barrier. Is they just don't have somebody this is their job to do. Another resource that we're working on getting developed.
We have some experience working with partners in different communities, and we know it's not always easy to get them on board. It's pretty clear to me that once they're involved in the virtual gatherings and the information that you share in those gatherings and people sharing their stories and your rural experts, why people would stay involved. But I'm a little curious how you get them on board in the first place. Is it just word of mouth? Is there some other effort that's involved in that process?
That's a great question. So Reimagining Rural has become this bigger thing than we ever imagined it to be. There's quite a following now. However, that being said, we utilize our connections with our small towns that we're working with. We utilize our extension agents to help share this information because, again, we have one in every county reservation. So we work through them. We work through our partners at Montana Community Foundation to help share this information. Our other partners are Montana Main Street, Nikki Zurcher, Montana Main Street, huge partner with us. So that's primarily how we spread information about it. And I will say, there is good participation because so many small towns just need this. They know they need it. So they're looking and grasping for something that might help them. They know what's happening in their towns and they want their towns to be, the best that it can be. They need some help with it. So secondly, the grants help. I mean, obviously having some incentive, having a little carrot out there is always helpful. And, we see that sometimes. I mean, I can sit here and talk about all the benefits and the positive outcomes. And there are some tremendous outcomes that we've seen. We've also seen some communities, that factor of readiness is apparent and they just can't muster up the people to the table or to get things done. And that's okay. Maybe it's just not time. So we continue to work with them. We offer to come out to communities as needed. That's a great example is Warden, which is a community on the outskirts of Billings, unincorporated, was facing a lot of challenges. And some folks, community volunteers, got together, decided to do Reimagining Rural. They participated after Tara Mastel and Katie Weaver, my colleagues, come out and facilitate some planning sessions with them. And they created a nonprofit organization. They created a local event and they needed streetlights. And it was like, wow, streetlights. Like, I'm not sure, they created a mural too. But it was like streetlights. And they amazingly, they got streetlights. Like this year, they got some streetlights put in. Like they made the right connections at the county level with the economic development organizations and tremendous success. So, it's great to see. And again, like I said, sometimes you'll see communities that they might have only one or two people participate and nothing comes of it. And that's, like I said, that happens and it's okay. The flip side is like Wolf Point last year, shout out to Wolf Point. I think Wolf Point showed up one night with 40 plus people in the room, which was probably the most we've ever seen in one location.
It sounds like your projects the projects that people come up with are super diverse, right? Like stoplights versus a mural versus a wayfinding system.
Yes. And they typically start small. And we tell them that start where you're at. So what we see generally is the community does start with something that is easy to accomplish, low-hanging fruit, get an easy win. And then they start building up. So I call it spiraling up, right? Instead of downward spiral, we're going to spiral up. We're going to start with something that's easy to do, makes you feel good. People see you're making some progress. And then try to tackle something a little bit bigger. So it's a readiness factor too. So I can't say that people did the virtual series and then jumped right into streetlights or things. They usually started with small, like a newcomers event or completing a mural or cleanup, even cleanup, having a community cleanup is a great place to start.
Yeah. And in fact, this exactly resonates with something. So I listened to one of the Reimagining Rural recordings that you have on your YouTube channel. And your external expert was it was two women from a group they started called Save Your Town. And I was hooked instantly because that's their message, right? Like, start small, find the people who will say yes and work with you. Don't try to get everybody on board. Get the people who will work with you. Start with a very small thing and then see where it goes, right? But don't think you're going to get streetlights right away. When what you might need is just people agreeing to sweep the sidewalks downtown. They're part of the sidewalk, right?
Oh, so totally. So Becky and Deb, and they're fantastic. And so, we had them a couple of times, and subsequently, then they've come to Montana to specific communities, have hired them to come and come do assessments or visit their communities. I mean, absolutely start where you're at. Start with it's something that you can get done, because I think one of the worst things that you can do, like housing. Okay. So we all know housing is a huge need, but if you're not ready to tackle housing, the worst thing that you can happen is go out and be so, full of vigor to let's do something and then take on something that's way too big and fail. Like, that's probably one of the worst things that can happen. So start with something small, something that you can do and be successful and build upon that. You'll be much more successful in the long run. So this has grown. We're working on another program called Community Heart and Soul, which is from the Orton Family Foundation. So thanks again to Montana Community Foundation. They're taking the lead on this. And we're supporting them. But one of their mantras, goals for that program is take the long view. And that is so true when it comes to community health, community development, is that you're doing things today, but you've got like so much with community development is you're playing the long game. Because you may have a win today and a success tomorrow, and then a new challenge comes around that you have to work through. So, I mean, if these challenges were easy, they'd be solved and we wouldn't have the work, right? So I don't know if you ever arrive. I don't know if you ever solve issues when it comes to community health, community well-being. You just tackle what's in front of you and make progress.
Yes. Yes. And I think that there's no Superman, right? Like, we have to be our own superheroes, and we're not super powered, right? We're just people. And so we have to know that not everything is going to look the way we think, and maybe not everything's going to work the way we wanted, but we have to start, right? And it's hard to start.
Yeah, it is. Community resilience, right? As blunt as it is, in a lot of the presentations I do now, I very much mention no one's coming to save you. Nobody's coming to save your town. If you want your towns to change, to be better, then it has to start from within. And so you have to build up local capacity. And that, again, like we frame it through that community capitals framework. There's a lot of different ways you could look at it, but the stronger your community is from within, you're going to increase your capacity and you're going to be more resilient. We talk about this a lot, is the Montana Rural Capacity Index. Well, it's nationwide. It's the Rural Capacity Index from Headwaters Economics. And it's Dr. Kristen Smith who created it. But it is a index that shows the capacity level of rural communities and counties across the United States. We obviously specifically look at Montana's. But we had Chris talk at a Reimagining Rural event, and her data shows that 68% of Montana counties are at low capacity when compared to the rest of the United States. So what does that mean? So what does capacity look like in rural communities? So what we're talking about is sheer number of people stepping up to take on leadership roles. We're talking about paid professional staff, the lack of paid professionals in these places, financial resources, technology, like we still have areas that don't have broadband, right? Knowledge, skill set, those social connections, that skilled labor. So all of those kinds of things make up that capacity. But the thing that why I mention this to rural towns or small towns when I go there is the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, they already don't look like the past 50 years when you're talking Montana's small towns. So the approaches that we used in the past might not work in the future. So we have to be innovative. We have to be willing to take some risks. Now, I'm not talking throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm talking about take some calculated risks, do things different, be open to new ideas, because at the end of the day, nobody's coming to save your town. And we have to figure out new ways of being resilient and building our own capacity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. And then it's like, how do you build local conversations around that? So, and it goes back to all of it, like being welcoming to newcomers, being open to different technology, being open to different ways of doing things. It's that difference between fixed and growth mindset.
That's right. And, when you talk about some of the challenges I'm thinking about in very rural towns, as much as some people move to those towns to have a more neighborly and friendly environment, you have a lot of people that move there for privacy and not as much interaction. And in a small town, those differences, your population is smaller and those differences can be more significant. So it is a very big challenge sometimes to bring people sort of across the line to understand that, how they can help without it interfering with sort of their life choices that way. And all of this gets me thinking also a little bit about the rural and urban picture. I'm sort of wondering, obviously Reimagining Rural is working in rural areas, but how big is too big to be rural, right? Like when does a community not qualify because it's too urban?
That's a really good question. I don't think there was any threshold. So some of the bigger towns, we've seen things like Dillon, Havre, Miles City have participated. And some of them have been quite successful. Havre, super successful. The flip side of that, we've had smaller towns in Western Montana participate that this just was not for them, right? Because they're not facing the same kinds of issues that maybe a Eastern Montana community is, right? So when you have what historically and traditionally are rural communities, but they're very adjacent to an urban center that is growing and their sprawl is happening, they're facing much different issues. Now, you could break this down into fundamentally the same conversation about welcoming new people, about being inclusive, about being transparent, about being proactive, about all of those kinds of things, because that's the part of the fundamental piece for Reimagining Rural. But we have had some communities that participated that were just like, this isn't the conversation for us. We know that at the state level, and we've had that conversation too, is like, how do we help communities that are not facing these same kind of things. Now, that being said, like we've had Boulder has participated. So obviously where Boulder is geographically in between, some more urban centers. I just heard from Boulder and I think they're applying this go around. So they've participated, seen some success. They're also a pilot community for our Heart and Soul program right now. So they're working, right? They're working on it. They're trying. So that's sometimes that's the best you can hope for, is that people are being proactive about planning what kind of future they want for their community.
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously urban areas have a lot more stuff, right? And they have more people who are paid. They have more just general opportunity to identify assets and make use of them, right? There's a lot going on in urban areas that may not be available in rural areas. But I feel like a common thread there is that sometimes it's hard wherever you are to see that you have assets and to identify people who might be champions for your work, right? So a while ago, I saw this really lovely short video on YouTube about how you can tell what your assets are. And they were talking about how even in ourselves, we need to think about the assets in our heads, in our hearts, and in our hands, right? The things you know, the things you feel, and the connections that you have made, and then the stuff you can do, right? And often, maybe we don't think that those are assets, right? But you don't know until you try to, find the connections to let you use them, right? And similarly, we may not know who the champion is, and it may be easier to identify in a bigger town, but maybe your champion is like a hairdresser and not the person in charge, right? Could you talk a little bit about how do you find those hidden champions? How do you, in rural areas, I guess specifically, and how do you if people are kind of resistant to change, how do you find the avenue to have a conversation even about that?
Back to kind of this fundamental community development approach that's who we are. That's what we take. We actually refer to it and there's different, people call it different things. And that's part of I guess, maybe that's a challenge too. We all did the same thing. It's probably just called something different, right? But we refer to it as community asset mapping. And so, for Reimagining Rural specifically, the application is designed to start to get them thinking like that. So application is really simple. It's almost like a community scavenger hunt. So you go out and find partners, local partners or resources that can help make your event successful. Who are they and how can they help? So for example, your school. Okay, so if I'm going to coordinate, if I'm a community volunteer, if I'm the hairdresser or the local business owner or, the head of the local PTSA and I want to do Reimagining Rural, I'm going to go talk to our school superintendent. And why am I going to get them involved? Because the kids, they're a huge piece of our community and we want the kids to have a say in things. And then maybe what they will agree to do is put it in their school newsletter or share with their teachers or their school board and say, go participate. This is a good thing, right? And so, anyway, so we put it into the Reimagining Rural application itself. Beyond that, we can also provide educational trainings. We go to communities and we will facilitate asset mapping activities with communities to get them thinking about those assets. And again, we frame it in that community capitals framework. And so what we do is we just get people brainstorming about what is an asset and talking about built assets. So what are the things that are constructed in your community that are positive? And they just put it on big, large sticky notes, right? So they just start spitballing everything. And it could be the fairgrounds, the baseball field. And so once they get it up on paper, every time I've done this, what I hear from people is, wow, we really have a lot of positive stuff. It's like, yeah, you do. You just needed to think about it. So, Townsend, great example. I've been to Townsend now 2 years in a row. They have what's called a Big Sky, Big Leadership Program. It's a community-based leadership program ran through Extension. And we do asset mapping every year with them. That map is growing. Broadus, another great example, did some community asset mapping with them. And now their chamber maintains it. So that's one piece of it. Now, second piece of it is, how do you get people involved? This is a new term, but not a new thing, is social influencers. So historically, social influencers have been around forever. Social influencer, new coined term. But if you boil it down, what does that mean? It means that everybody listens to somebody. And so every town has key people that are the makers or the breakers of what goes on in your town, right, wrong, or indifferent. And so what we try to teach or facilitate or educate folks is to figure out who are those people in your community. Who do you need to go to get that, what I refer to as the good housekeeping seal of approval? That yes, this is a good thing. And yeah, you should get on board. It is strategic, feels sneaky sometimes. But the reality is it's there. Everybody listens to somebody. Everybody's influenced by somebody. So you just have to figure out, strategically figure out who are those people in your community. Every town's got them. And there is actual research behind that. There is actual community development research that says this is methodology of how you figure out who those people are. So we just try to work with communities to offer support and training for those communities to go through that process. It's interesting. It's so interesting to go in and facilitate those kind of conversations in a local community. Because they know once they get it onto paper, they're like, oh, yeah. Oh, it's Joe. We knew that. But they go through the process to figure it out.
Right. One of the things we've been trying to do in the last couple of years in our bureau is to, breach the clinic wall or breach the public health wall and figure out how to, bridge the very real, it's not really a divide. It's more like a different set of immediate priorities, right? Between people who are doing clinical work and people who are doing all the rest of the stuff in the community, right? Because the medical stuff is really important, right? Like that's part of health, but it's not the total part of health. And so we've been trying to figure out how do you bridge that sort of siloed set of priorities to show that they're connected. And we're sort of making some progress. Like we have some projects that are cool, and we've talked to some of those people on this podcast before, but I feel like helping the clinical folks, they know all these things, but they also have to do certain things. So is there like, I don't even know if I have a question here. I just know that we're trying to do it, but using some of these tools, right? Like we're starting to promote community asset assessments, like having an asset mindset, having a strengths mindset. But sometimes I think that the things that we see as assets, like the clinicians and the nurses and the public health building, right? The public health staff, they may not also be seen as assets because they're doing this separate thing. Have you ever encountered that? Maybe that's the question.
In my own experience, and I think I want to think beyond that, like the public health component is a tremendous asset in our rural communities. Tremendous asset in our rural communities. And especially if and when they take on a community-based approach. I think in mindset, people think of public health and they start to think of traditional well, not necessarily public health, but health in general, like medical health, right? Like physical health reasons why you would go to public health. I think if and when public health departments really try to be intentional and holistic and be a part of a community, then they're much more successful or much more viewed as that. But I think that's a movement we're going to in a lot of sectors too. Like I sit on our school board. And certainly I believe schools are taking more of a community approach as well, like looking at being, what is their role in the community? And as part of the community in a larger picture. So, and I don't know if that answers your question at all, but certainly what I have seen is, there are some public health departments that are tremendous assets and tremendous resources in the community, and they're very well trusted, very well respected. And that's tough, right? In the climate we live in right now, and what we've been through with COVID, that's tough because they were put in a really hard position.
Absolutely.
Very difficult position.
Do the public health workers come to the Reimagining Rural events, the virtual events? Do they attend those, or maybe just being kept informed of them?
I'm not sure. I don't have a great answer for that one because I don't know off the cuff.
Yes.
Like I'm not quite sure. Like I can give you examples in like a specific example in Forsyth. So when we started Reimagining Rural, and because I work remotely and I still live in Forsyth, but I was still the extension agent. So the first go around of Reimagining Rural, I was still working primarily in Rosebud and Treasure counties. And in Rosebud County, our public health department was huge community resource and asset. And so always sent information to them to share and to be a part of things. And tremendous resource all the way around, supporting our schools, supporting the communities. But I don't have great insight into the rest of the communities on it.
Yeah, maybe that's something we can start focusing on a little bit. Even just, making sure that people that we know about this resource so that it's one more thing, one more tool in their pocket, right? This is a tremendous resource.
Like Broadus, for example, I know that they work closely with their public health department. So yeah, it's without a doubt. And that is part of that asset mapping, right? Is understanding those resources that you have available in your community and what they're doing. It's sometimes you wouldn't think this, but there's some truth to it that even in rural communities, it's pretty siloed. You stay in your lane, like this is my job. This is what I'm doing. And so we go into communities sometimes just to start the conversation about how, for an example, how public health's work can interface with the school. Y'all are playing on the same team. Realistically, you have the same goals. So how do we build those relationships? And you wouldn't think that's the case, but that is true even in small towns. And so again, if building capacity and building resilience is one of the outcomes you want, you're going to be better off by stronger social connections and more collaboration.
That's absolutely true. And I think it is really hard sometimes when you're in a community and you've been there a long time, or even if you're new, to sort of recognize who you can work with and what those assets are, and just breaking down that silo to think about things in a broader sense. It takes an effort. I don't think it comes naturally to most people to do that.
I'm recognizing that. It doesn't, for me, makes total sense, but that's where I come from. But the lens that I look things through, but how do we work together better? And how can we support each other in our efforts? And that's just an ongoing conversation. A great example, again, just because it's Forsyth, and I know our public health department worked with our school to put up new signage in the downtown area. And it has the school logo on it. And it's one of those running marquees, so you can put messages on it, right? So they share it, right? So sometimes it's public health messaging. Sometimes it's an update of what's going on at the school. Sometimes it's a chamber event. But it was it was a culmination of all these different entities coming together to make one thing happen. Everybody benefits a little bit out of it. The town benefits because it makes your community better at the end of the day. So, ultimately that's what you want.
So how do communities get involved in a rural revitalization project? If they're listening today and they're interested, what are the actual steps for that?
So if they want to apply for Reimagining Rural, they can go to the MSU Extension website, or they can at least Google Montana Reimagining Rural, and it's going to take them there. It's an easy peasy application process. They go there. It's all online, except for one piece is the partnership roster. So they download the partnership roster. They go around. It's like I said, like a mini community assessment, asset mapping. Go around and recruit different entities to participate and turn it in. And it's pretty simple. And then at the conclusion of all the sessions, there will be 2 different grant opportunities available to communities. So one is the seed grant. So that is somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000. And that's for the easy to complete projects that were identified in the virtual community gatherings. And then we have the Wells Fargo Foundation grant that is for more advanced projects. That is upwards of $7,500 for communities. And we expect to have about 10 of those grants available.
You can apply for either or do most people start with the seed grant and then?
Most start with the seed grant, but we've never had the large one available before.
Right. Okay.
So the seed grant was the only one that was available. But I would suggest if you're a first time community and you're just getting started and this is all new ideas and new concepts, then I would start with the smaller one. I would say the bigger, now you could still be a new community to Reimagining Rural, but you've done a lot of groundwork, right? You've done a lot of work in the past. You're moving forward. You're progressing. Then maybe the $7,500 one is more appropriate. So.
What an amazing amount of good information. I'm so inspired by the program. I really, really am. I just am impressed with everything that gets done, and it's a need that we need filled. It's something that's absolutely in demand, I suspect.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I'm a pretty forward and direct person, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say this too. I mean, moving forward into the future, I just think we collectively as a state have to figure out a way to make investments into our rural community. But we need to invest in rural. Rural matters. And it is a huge piece to the overall fabric that makes our state great. And it makes us who we are. And we need to recognize that and invest in it.
Yeah, it's a huge part of our Montana identity, that's for sure.
Yes.
We're winding down here. So I guess I'm wondering if there's anything else that you would like to mention that we have not asked you about.
I could talk hours about Reimagining Rural and the great work that is going on in our small towns. In fact, I love talking about the communities and the success that they're having because it's theirs. It's their story. I just get to share it. So I could talk about it all day long. A couple other things that we have coming up is in June, we're calling it Rural Summit. It will be a gathering of statewide people who work with rural in any kind of capacity.
Whoa.
So it's like we want people who statewide folks or even regional may not be in rural, but they work with rural. So let's all come to the table and have conversations about what is rural health looking like and what's rural business looking like and rural government and how do we start this conversation about collaborating and working together.
Well, that's great. Well, we have sure appreciated it.
Yeah, I could hear about it all day long.
I know. Exactly.
Love it.
So I just want to say thank you so much to our podcast listeners on behalf of Trina and myself and the crews behind the scene. Thank you especially to our fabulous guest, Jennifer Anderson. If you would like any more information on what we discussed today, just visit our website at talkinghealthinthe406.mt.gov, where there will be links to the information that we've discussed. And if you haven't already, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. And until next time, be healthy and be well.